Well, I'll tell you what, C.J. Box's books keep getting better and better. They got a fantastic combination of plot, character development, and absolutely great, punchy, vivid writing. They're really, really good. Battle Mountain is his most recent one, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. And then once I got it, I absolutely could not put it down. There are two plot lines in Battle Mountain that end up coming together. One involves Nat Romnowski. The other, of course, is Joe Pickett. Now, starting with the Nat Romnowski, if you recall the last book, 3-Inch Teeth, a bad guy named Axel Soledad killed Nate's wife, Liv. And in this one, he is out absolutely for revenge. Now, Joe Pickett, on the other hand, his storyline has to do with a phone call that he got from Governor Rulon. He's been reelected, and Governor Rulon has fundamentally lost his son-in-law on a hunting trip someplace in Wyoming near Battle Mountain. Now, Joe Pickett is out there to find Rulon's son-in-law. Nat Romnowski is out there to get this Axel Soledad. And as the plots go back and forth, as you're reading the book, you're flipping between the two stories. They end up coming together at the end, and I'm not going to reveal any more of I don't want to ruin the end of the plot for you. Now, in his books, C.J. Box gives all of his characters, the major guys and the secondary players, very full development. You really understand what makes these guys tick, what their motivations are, what their problems are. Really very carefully done. And if you take a guy like Joe Pickett, as you know, if you've read any of the books, he's a kind of a Dudley Do-Right kind of guy. He's not real, well, his word would be Western. He's a lousy shot with a handgun. But what it is he's got a really good sense for justice, for decency. He's very persistent. He will follow every clue and really rely on the people around him, both his wife and Nat Romnowski, who's his friend. Really, to me, a very admirable guy. And of course, he's in love with nature. I mean, that's how C.J. Box gets in these beautiful descriptions of the Wyoming countryside, the wildlife, and stuff like that. And me, I've got no experience with any of it, but I find it all beautifully done. Now, Nat Romnowski, on the other hand, is a former special operator for the United States government, and now he happens to be a falconer. Does a bird abatement business and things like that, and he has the characteristics of being able to give you explosive ultra violence, and not in any kind of a what would I say, arbitrary kind of way. It always seems to be justified, and he's a very loyal friend of Joe Pickett. So these two guys complement one another, kind of the way Joe Pike and Elvis Cole complement one another in the Robert Crace books. But on Nate, I don't know, it's hard to imagine becoming his friend, because he's so unique. One thing you don't want to be is his enemy. And the falconry business, it's okay. In this one, I think some of the bird stuff becomes a little bit much in a couple of places, but it doesn't detract from the book at all. Now, there are some noteworthy parts in this book that really struck me. One was a description of the United States pullout from Afghanistan. And quite frankly, when you see it laid out in plain common sense terms, it is absolutely horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Now, C.J. Box doesn't spend a lot of time dwelling on that, but it kind of took my breath away when I read it. The second thing that I thought was very noteworthy is one of the things that's going on here is there's one of these secret confabs of powerful people called the Centurions that's taken place on Battle Mountain, and that ends up being a scene of the kind of the denouement, so to speak, of the book. And you look at this, and again, C.J. Box doesn't dwell on it, but you start to think a little bit about where power is in American society. Now, C.J. Box, finally, he is not one to dwell on social and political themes. To the extent he's got a political theme at all, it's kind of a distrust of Washington bureaucrats who don't really understand Wyoming, and they control most of the land out in the West. And, these pinheads sitting at desks in Washington tend to screw things up. And quite frankly, I certainly can get behind that. I really can. And I don't live out west. I live down in Florida. Now, the final thing that, again, is noteworthy about this is Sheridan. Sheridan is Joe Pickett's oldest daughter, and she's become a kind of a helper to Nat Romnowski in his falconry business. And she is really starting to come into her own. He's introducing her a little bit into a serious role in the books, and I think it's welcome. Anyway, Battle Mountain, just finished it. It's just out a couple of weeks, I think, and really thoroughly recommend it. And if you haven't read all of the Joe Pickett books, I recommend you do that. And certainly, if you were to read, if you've never read a Joe Pickett novel, and you're interested in this Battle Mountain, I would strongly suggest that you read the one that comes before it, 3-Inch Teeth, before you do Battle Mountain. Both of them are great, but I think 3-Inch Teeth would really help you understand the background for Battle Mountain. That's my recommendation this week. I'll see you next week.